I'll introduce Bryce. I need to keep moving. Many years ago, I wondered what would happen if and when the world ran out of oil. This was before electric vehicles were on the horizon, despite the fact that some of the first cars in the 19th century were actually electric. Now they're not only in view, but their uptake is growing year by year, as Bryce will show. Bryce Gaton has been involved with the EV sector since 2008. His current roles involve writing for Australia's premier EV news site, the Driven.io, running the EV transition support consultancy EV Choice, and providing EV build safety training to a number of Australian University FSAE race teams. In his spare time, Bruce writes on EV topics for Renew magazine, as well as regularly presenting on EV issues and opportunities at conferences, public forums and events. He's also the writer behind the EV car model fact sheets and webpage found on the Electric Vehicle Association national website. So it's over to you, Bryce.
Thank you.
Sit down.
Okay, I'll introduce Bryce. I need to keep moving. Many years ago, I wondered what would happen if and when the world ran out of oil. This was before electric vehicles were on the horizon, despite the fact that some of the first cars in the 19th century were actually electric. Now they're not only in view, but their uptake is growing year by year, as Bryce will show. Bryce Gaton has been involved with the EV sector since 2008. His current roles involve writing for Australia's premier EV news site, the Driven.io, running the EV transition support consultancy EV Choice, and providing EV build safety training to a number of Australian University FSAE race teams. In his spare time, Bruce writes on EV topics for Renew magazine, as well as regularly presenting on EV issues and opportunities at conferences, public forums and events. He's also the writer behind the EV car model fact sheets and webpage found on the Electric Vehicle Association national website. So it's over to you, Bryce.
Thank you. Oh, it's a pleasure to be here today, and it's also a pleasure to find I do a lot of work with the Formula SAE race team, which is Formula Society of Automotive Engineers, and it's a worldwide competition for students, engineering students, to build an electric vehicle, and they build it and race it in various competitions around the world. The Australasian one comes up in early December, and it's interesting that it's actually fun to be here with the person with the least amount of grey hair, because I'm certainly not with the most grey hair with all the students working with them. Today I'm going to talk to you about electric vehicles and where they are at the moment and what's happening into the future. As I'll talk about there, I come from a teaching background, so I always put the topics that I'm going to cover for the day at the very front, so you can keep me honest and make sure I've covered them all by the end of the talk. So I'm going to talk about what is an EV, talk about the EV transition in general, and then how it relates to Australia. Then I'll talk about how EV charging works and how it's different to refuelling a petrol car. Talk about a bit of policy. I do a bit of EV myth busting along the way, although there's a few good myths that are floating around that keep getting recycled in new language. Then I'll talk about sort of, if you're looking at an EV, how to choose one and where to find good information about them. And by the way, if anybody's interested in a copy of the slides, I'm happy to email a PDF of them. That's evnews@bigpond.com. I'll also have that email address at the very end as well. So, make a start. What is an EV? Well, there's basically the plug-in electric vehicles, PEVs. The simplest one is the battery electric vehicle, or BEV, and that has an electric motor driven by a fairly reasonable size electric battery. And as you slow down, that electric motor turns into a generator, so the effort of pulling energy energy out of an electric motor slows the car down, so it's called regenerating electricity into your battery, so it's called regenerative braking. And most braking in an EV of all sorts is done by regenerative braking, so your brake pads and discs take a lot less wear. The next one along is the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and their day was back when the cost of electric battery was something around $1,200 US dollars per kilowatt hour. Given the average electric car battery is now 60 to 90 kilowatt hours, you can do the maths. In those days, a very small battery was a lot cheaper to put in to do most of your driving around town, because the average commute in Melbourne, in fact most Australian cities, is somewhere around 30 kilometres a day. So we had a battery that did 40, 50, 60 kilometres. The Holden Volt, for instance, had about 80 kilometre range. They found in those cars, if people didn't leave town, the petrol went stale in the car because it had been never used. But they were a very good interim measure when the batteries are very expensive. Nowadays, they're getting down very close to $100 per kilowatt hour. So you put a battery in that'll do 5, 6, even 700 kilometres. So the use case for the plug-in hybrid is basically getting smaller and smaller. You can even do easy interstate trips. Melbourne to Sydney, there's plenty of chargers now, and I'll talk about that a bit later. So public charging networks also rolling out. So as a consequence, the use case for the plug-in hybrid is getting smaller and smaller, and they make up maybe a third to a quarter of sales overall. In Australia, there had been a blip with the fringe benefits tax change back in April, so they went up a bit, but they're still a smaller part. They're about a third to a quarter in Australia. Next one along is the early things like the Prius and the Camrys that are still made, the hybrid electric vehicle. They only run on petrol. The electric motor basically is a way of saving the braking energy. So in the bans coming up overseas where they say no more sales of passenger and like commercial like internal combustion engine vehicles, they're included because they only run on petrol. They run out of petrol, they stop. Whereas the plug-in hybrid and the battery, obviously, the plug-in hybrid will do a short distance before it stops. You can recharge by a 3-pin plug, it's like drawing it there, and then the full battery, no need for fuel at all. And then there is the hydrogen car. Basically, its technical name is the fuel cell electric vehicle. It is too is an electric car, but it uses a chemical reaction to change hydrogen into water and releases energy in the process. Main problem with them is they're basically a zombie. They're dead, but they don't know it. The reason for that is we have about 8 refuelling stations for hydrogen in Australia. I'm not going to bother trying to count the number of PowerPoints if you wanted to count the number of possible refuelling stations for a battery electric or even a plug-in hybrid. The technology is still in its infancy to some degree, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. And the manufacturers, the car manufacturers, don't quite like hydrogen and wish they would go to hydrogen. The reason for that is they need lots of service work. Probably more than a petrol car. So there is an issue there with electric vehicles need negligible amount of service, whereas the full hydrogen car, there's lots and lots of issues and maintenance, and it's still not a particularly good technology. Overseas in America, basically, I think it was Toyota dumped the sales of all their hydrogen cars. There's only 1 or 2 places you can refuel it in California, and the problem was they couldn't sell them even at basically giveaway prices because you had to drive half the range to get to the one of the refueling station that might be near you, and that's basically not going to change. Hydrogen has a place in some areas, maybe it's transformed, although it seems to be disappearing fairly rapidly. For those of you who might be members of the Renew organisation or subscribe to Renew magazine, the next issue will in fact cover electric buses, and they're finding that even the electric use case for electric buses, full electric rather than hydrogen fuel cell or plug-in hybrids, is in fact probably there already. Today, however, I'm talking about plug-ins only, and particularly battery electric vehicles, because a plug-in hybrid, basically you don't need a special charger, you don't need to get too fussed about recharging it if you've forgotten, because you can always run on the petrol. The battery electric vehicle, you need to understand more about its charging systems and needs, and you need to perhaps put in a bigger charger at home to get a full charge overnight should you need it. As I said earlier, the hybrids will be disappearing with the bans on fossil fuel cars coming up overseas, and as I said, the fuel cell electric vehicle is effectively a zombie. It will die disappear fairly quickly, and the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle is in fact fading away as the battery electric vehicle. is becoming the norm. As was mentioned earlier, electric cars are not a newfangled thing, they're not a flash in the pan. They were around right at the start of the automotive revolution, the start of the horse's carriage. That is a 1906 electric vehicle. I love the lady here showing off her really safe electric car charging system with a great big copper knife switch. Things have improved slightly on the charging side. You're not likely to get zapped, but roughly a third of all cars sold around the turn of the last century were electric, and around a third were petrol, and the other third were external combustion or steam powered. Obviously steam had a slight issue with having to wait 45 minutes for it to warm up, and if you overload it, you might blow it up. Electric had an issue with they were running on lead acid batteries, so they had a fairly short range. They needed recharging, and the issue there was electricity was fairly uncommon there. It was only in the biggest central business districts of the world. So if you got outside of the big CBDs, you had some difficulty trying to recharge your car. These days, hydrogen is pretty much where electricity was back at the turn of the last century. There's very few places to refuel, very hard to cart hydrogen around, because electricity is pretty much everywhere. Even in the outback, it's probably easier to get an electric power point than it is in some places to get refueling. The Nullarbor Roadhouse, when I drove over to Perth about 3 years ago, I could get my car charged overnight, plug into the power point there, but various cars, because it closed overnight, there were cars lined up at the petrol pumps for the 7 o'clock opening in the morning, whereas I was refueled, ready to go by then. EV transition is coming in lots more forms than just electric cars. I tend to focus on electric cars, but what's coming is electric trucks. Many of us have heard of the Tesla truck that is now for sale overseas, mainly in America. They're rolling out slowly. Tesla have their issues at the moment. Scania and Daimler and various others are actually building electric cars. That one there is from Scania. I drove that. That is available for sale here in Australia. I drove that a couple of years ago now. That one there had about 280, 300 kilometre range. They're now building in England a 500 kilometre range version of that. With the new mega charging system that will be available for trucks, that will do a recharge to 80% pretty much within the time required for a truck stop. So you could theoretically replace the current trucking system with electric trucks, even Melbourne City, with a proper charging network thrown in. That's not quite there yet for the charging network, so that may be an interim use for hydrogen. We shall see. Mining machinery, obviously underground you don't want the fumes, so actually there is some underground mining machinery already. The electric bobcat was shown 3-ish years ago, and actually buy a small electric bobcat here in Australia already. Tractors will be coming full electric. Obviously they're actually a very good system for electric, so they can go to autonomous driving. How many of you here seen the film Interstellar? Few people. In that film is actually, at the very start, there's a whole lot of tractors being set up for running autonomously via GPS, and they just drive around the farm with nobody in them. They will have that option. You can actually set the thing to do its work with nobody in it. Who here hasn't tried to be run over by an electric Deliveroo bicycle? There are electric carbo, and almost every delivery bike these days is electric. In fact, most of them are not even bikes, they're pseudo motorcycles, but that's another story. They're technically illegal. I don't quite know why nobody's cracking down on them. But there's so many electric scooters, electric bikes, you see the bike travel along here, lots of families riding electric bikes these days. That is a Harley Davidson electric motorcycle called the Livewire. They've been making it for several years now. They're spun the company out as a separate business, but Livewire is a Harley Davidson subsidiary. Yes, electric planes are a thing. That one against the blue sky is a flat trailer. And I believe there's a small fleet of them here in Melbourne being used. You see it far less noisy buzzing around something like Moorabbin Airport than the others. That other one there is called the Alice. It's actually a full electric executive jet replacement, and it is in flight trials for certification for someone. For those of us who remember the cartoon The Jetsons and the little hover things that used to land next to you, hop into them, that's the equivalent now. It's one-person piloted vehicle. Ultimately, they expect it to become autonomous. You'll dial it up on your phone app, and it'll land in its designated spot. It's vertical takeoff and landing. When it gets up in the air, the wings tilt, and it will fly at about 100 kilometres an hour, and will deliver you in about an hour's trip if you wanted to. It's called the Black Fly, if you want to look it up, and it's for sale for pilot use in America already. That was built out here in Croydon. It's meant to be an autonomous platform. It does have steering wheel and brake at the moment, but it ultimately will be basically a skateboard. It is a skateboard platform, and it will ultimately be fully autonomous. And one of their ideas is for it to be a delivery vehicle. So it just comes along your street, the app tells you it's there, you pop out, punch in your code, and it'll spit your parcel out to you. And they have AEV as a company, if you want to look that one up. Electric buses, as I mentioned earlier, I've just written an article on the progress of electric buses. Overseas, various places have converted to full electric bus. Shenzhen in China in 2017, 2018 was the first city to completely electrify some 16,000 buses to electric. I'll let you know a secret, it didn't bring down the electricity grid. So it's been running full electric buses for some time. In Australia, we're actually just passing the stage of trials and starting to roll out electric buses in the hundreds. And we'll, in New South Wales, I think they're talking about the full electrification of the Sydney fleet by 2035. Yes, there are in fact electric ferries. That's called the Ampera, and there are quite a lot of these being run up in Scandinavia and Norwegian in particular. That thing does a regular run between several ports in one of the fjords there, and it's, I think, a 4 megawatt hour battery in it, and it recharges, very big charger obviously, and it recharges at each stop as it loads and unloads, and there's multiple hundred passengers, and I've forgotten how many cars. It's quite a large ferry. And to give you a funny story, I did an interview on the ABC several years ago when they were making all of their public transport fleet electric, or electrified, or green energy, so you know, trains and everything else be run on green energy, and some of the caller rang up and asked, what about the ferries? This is to the minister, and the minister said, we're thinking about electrifying the ferries, we'll put really big batteries in them, they might sink. The obviously hadn't heard of this one. General equipment, the councils and things love general equipment because they will run all day very quietly, not annoy the neighbours, and they will recharge easily on 15 amp power point, or even the small blowers and whatever chainsaws will recharge easily. It's not an ordinary power point. And yes, you can actually buy an electric boat. That's a Maserati, more designed for lake use. They were in Europe, in Lake Como, those sort of places up in Italy. But you can actually buy electric outboard motors. There are various companies in Australia that are selling them already. Transitions. We've all been through quite a lot of mobile phone, colour television, washing machines, you name it. This is the typical sort of thing that happened with the horseless carriage. 1900, this is a very affluent area of America. Lots of horses and carriage, and one horseless carriage. It was only 13 years later, you'll see the swish of a tail of one horse and carriage, and everything else is the horseless version. So transitions, when they happen, can happen quite quickly, but they start off slowly, as I'll show with the next slide. This is a very typical curve for any new technology. If you're feeling really good one day, our world in data.org is a really good spot to get a bit of fun with playing with different technology and when it started, when it fully adopted. And it's a typical curve. It starts off with the innovators. The first few percent go, oh yeah, I like this idea of the technology. How many of us thought Beta versus VHS tape recorders? And it will slowly take off as the technology starts maturing, and you get the early adopter. You go, I like this technology, it looks like it's going to be the thing. Then you get the early majority, and that sort of takes up to about 50%. You go, yep, it's there, we just want to make it work. After that, you get the late majority, and it starts tapering off to the laggards again, going, well, looks like it works, everybody else has got one, I'm like, well, why don't I? So they typically follow that curve. That's Australia. We were hit somewhere around 9.5% at the end of last year. We're hovering around the 12-13% now of electric vehicle sales. And despite some of the hype, that little blue band or blue-grey band there is plug-in hybrids. The rest is a full battery. So plug-in hybrids have had a bit of a blip at the moment, but they're still the majority of sales in Australia. Overseas, worldwide, it's around 25% of all new vehicles now are electric with a plug. Two-thirds, three-quarters of which are full battery. Norway, which I'll talk about later on, which has that sales ban that's starting this year on full all internal combustion passenger and light commercial vehicles, has hit 98%, of which I think it's 1 or 2% of those are plug-in hybrids. A bit of technology and a bit of terminology. EVSE, or electric vehicle supply equipment, is basically your car charger. And there are three main types. There's the ones that plug into a power point. That one at your top left is one that often comes with the car. Some of the manufacturers getting a bit cheapskate now and not supplying them, but almost all manufacturers still supply one with the car. And that will charge at about 8 amps or 2 kilowatts. And I'll remember these. You don't have to remember these numbers. I'll put up a table a bit later. But the key point is, it's called a granny charger sometimes, because they recharge about as fast as granny sometimes drives. But they will do a full charge if you left it plugged in long enough, and I'll just do an ordinary power point. The one below there, I call it sort of a jerry can in the boot, and that can be plugged into pretty much any outlet, from a 10 amp power point with the right adapters up to a 32 amp 3-phase outlet. And depending on the charger that's built into the car, there's AC charging, so power point charging is done via converting the AC to the DC in the car, so it has a charger built into the car. So depending on what size that is, it will charge it up to the maximum speed for what the charger in the car is. The middle one is the one that I usually recommend for putting in at home. This is a wall-mounted thing. And you'll see this one here with the socket is called a BYO charge, because you BYO that lead. And councils and public chargers for slower charging, perhaps, but they will actually like you to bring your own lead, because you don't have to look after it. It's like an airline at a power petrol station. People will drive over and treat them really badly, but if you happen to be bringing your own airline, you'll look after it, and it goes a lot less use because only you use it. So BYO leads are very good for councils and that type of thing, or public AC chargers. For your home use, I always recommend having the lead attached to the charger, because you just unplug it and wrap it around the charger. Problem with that one is, if you have one BYO lead, what happens is the one day that you left it at home because you couldn't be bothered unplugging it is the day you actually wanted to use it as a council charger to get a free charge. So unless you have two BYO leads, highly good idea to have one of those and keep one BYO lead, like spare tyre, in the boot and leave it there till you really need it. The next ones, these big fellas here, they're DC fast chargers. They charge via a different system, and I'll show you the plugs in a minute. And they charge much, much faster than these fellas on your left. As an example, this fella here will charge at up to 350 kilowatts. If that's 2 kilowatts, 2 into 350 is 175 times faster. And I have a table for the times in a minute, but basically what it means is that charge there is really good for either long distance travel, Melbourne to Sydney or whatever, or Melbourne to Perth, because I've done both of those trips now. Melbourne to Perth once, Melbourne to Sydney many times. This one here was an early charger that was built in Australia. That company sadly went broke, but they're 50 kilowatt chargers, so even they are 25 times faster. These days, the average charger going in is around 150, so 75 times faster than that. These things here, on an average home, will do 7 kilowatts, and as I'll talk about in a minute, that will pretty much give you a full charge, 0 to 100% overnight. So technically you don't need anything faster than that, unless you're doing Melbourne to Sydney. As I keep pointing out to people, because some people say, oh, wait till the plug's sorted. Isn't there a bit of a debate about which plug we might use in Australia? I'll let you into a secret. Well, it's not a very well kept one. That's the Australian standard and the European standard in New Zealand. It is any 3-phase electric country uses that particular combination, which is the top one there is the AC plug, and then it's combined into one big plug. So that's the AC side, and that's the 2 big DC pins. So those, we go back to there. The DC system uses those 2 big pins, and the AC uses that, and the DC uses that part of it. So it's called, strangely enough, the Combined Charging System, CCS. And that's what we use in Australia for all but 2 cars, because up until about 2017, we used, up until 2017, we used the DC was via that, and then the AC was either via that or that. So all the Japanese cars coming in are still using, I'll skip that. There are 2 cars left using the old DC plug, which is called the Chatamo plug, and that is the current Nissan Leaf and the Lexus 300, a couple of letters, I forget which. They're the only two left. The Nissan Ariya, which is now available for sale here now, uses the CCS2 system. So Nissan have given up using the CHAdeMO in Australia, so no more Nissan plates unless you buy a Leaf. And that's if you have bought the older Leafs, so the original Leaf, the early BMWs use that particular combination, and all Japanese cars still use that. So Japanese private, or those grey imports, will come with those. So just a warning, if you're buying a second-hand Leaf that's bought from Japan rather than an Australian delivered one, it will use that combination. It doesn't matter to some degree for the AC side, you just buy an adapter, $100 done, you can charge it any AC socket. Interestingly, the DC socket side I thought would take a few years to disappear on those DC chargers. CHAdeMO plugs are almost non-existent now, so you almost can't do a long distance travel with the older cars with the old CHAdeMO system. So just be aware of that. If you're buying a grey import vehicle, make sure it's got the CCS plug and not the CHAdeMO DC plug if you want to travel outside of Melbourne. In America, 110, 120 volt two-phase system there. They have recently adopted the Tesla standard, or what's called the North American charging standard. Everybody's using that, but it is a very peculiar electrical system in America. We don't use it. It will be useless to us because we have a much better three-phase system that provides more power, so we will never see that here. But basically, they're the three standards in the world. By the way, bypass talking about China, we'll just ignore that. They put whatever plug you want when it comes out of China. It's basically a CCS, but we'll make it slightly different to annoy the Americans. This coming trend is vehicle to something or vehicle to X. There are three layers. Vehicle to load. As you'll see there, the CCS system is a little later to the party, so you plug this little adapter into the AC socket, and it uses the charger built into the car to give you AC power out to 240 volts. Bang, you just plug it in. Often the car comes with the adapter, or they're a couple $100 to buy if they're getting a bit cheapskate, not supplying them anymore. On the old CHAdeMO system, it used to be via the DC plug, so now there's this $10,000 box, which is not legal to use here in Australia anyway, to do it. So the CHAdeMO, they learned basically from the mistakes of the CHAdeMO system, went, well, the charger built the car, why don't we just use that? We don't need a great big box. As I said, then you have the next layer up, which is vehicle to home or vehicle to building, and that is done basically feeding power to a box on the wall, and then that connects to the switchboard. For vehicle to home or vehicle to building, that box will turn the house or the building off momentarily and switch it over to get power out of the car. And then when you want to switch from the car back to the grid, it will then momentarily turn the power off altogether to the house and then switch on the grid. So there's no connection any time between the car battery and the grid. And that is the next layer below vehicle to grid, where you have that seamless transition. It will basically change from car to grid and back again without any need for switching the power off. And they're done by the DC side, so there's a DC to AC conversion box built onto the wall. Currently, as I said, CHAdeMO does V2X, but we just don't, nobody will be using that system because nobody uses CHAdeMO anymore. The CCS is basically being developed, and many cars already do vehicle to load. In fact, many cars brought here will do vehicle to home or vehicle to grid overseas already. They're actually manufactured to do it. I can go into the details of which ones we're talking. We've got some questions later over lunch, but I'll leave that alone for the moment. Many cars, as I said, are arriving and capable of, but they won't announce it yet. So you can't technically do it because they won't allow the warranty on it. We will see vehicle to home systems perhaps very late this year, and we'll see vehicle to grid probably next year. There's a bit of argy-bargy about how the box will talk to a car and the box talk to the grid, and they're still, as usual with Australia, 7 states, federation, they won't agree. Vehicle to load, if you're curious about using it, you have two main systems available. BYD will give you 8 amps or 2,000 watts. Hyundai Kia Genesis platform will do a 15 amp or 3600 watt. Key point with that is, just if you're wanting to use it, just add up the wattages written on the labels on the bottom of them. Make sure it's below 3600. Hunky-dory. I've actually borrowed Kia cars with the vehicle to grid, vehicle load, I should say. And we've run electric barbecue, hot plate, an induction hot plate, and LED lighting for an event. And I drove up to that particular one was Euroa. Did the talk there, and it used about 7% of the battery, feeding 40 people, running that system for 2 hours. Probably a little bit longer than 2 hours. So the vehicle to load doesn't really use a whole lot of power. For a normal campsite for a small family, you'd be hard pressed to use much of the battery in a week. But use those numbers there. Anything with a motor, by the way, if you like a power saw, they do have a spike at the start, so just make sure you don't allow the extra now. Refueling, we're used to that. Making time in our trip to pull over to a petrol station and refill. Petrol refueling becomes part of our norm. It is extra time, extra travel to get out of the way. Electric cars, it's a different paradigm. We need to do a bit of a mental shift, but our destination is our recharging. The point of cars is 95% of the time they sit there doing nothing. We're asleep, we're shopping, we're here. Why not take that time, when downtime of the car, to refuel it? So the whole point is charging time generally means petrol station, you want it to happen quickly, but it's part of you're standing there waiting for it, wind, rain, hail, sunshine. Whereas electric car, you plug it in, you want it up and do your thing, and it does its own thing recharging. So you pick your charging speed to suit the time that you'll stop for. If you stop overnight at home, an 8-hour charge is fine because you're sleeping for all that time and you're home for 12 hours perhaps, got home at 5 in the evening, you want to be at 8 or 9 in the morning, more than enough time to get a full charge. So they're the sort of things, that's what happens now. So the question is, how fast do you need to charge? If you're doing less than 100 kilometres in a day, overnight charge, said 8 amps, 2 kilowatts, less than 8 hours. I'll put all this up on the table next. So. And they're about $500. I'm also an electrician by background as well as a teacher. And if you put the PowerPoint next to the switchboard, it's going to be about $500 maximum. It should have its own circuit. By the way, don't use extension leads, or at least cheap old extension leads for an electric plug-in charger. This is what happened with the mate's BMW i3 when he wasn't leaving on in place. If you're doing lots of kilometres in a day, maybe 200, 300, 400 k's in a day, that will still recharge you. Most cars will give you that sort of range of the day, and that will give you a recharge overnight, 7.2 kilowatts, 332 amps. You get a full charge roughly in 9 hours. And from the cheapest to those, plus the installers near the switchboard, about 1,500. And that's the table I was talking about. If you're using one of the ones that comes with the car, they'll give you roughly 12 kilometres charged in an hour. So if you're plugging into a power point of the B&B, plugging into 12 hours, 1,244 kilometres recharged. If you're just driving out to the countryside, the B&B a couple hundred k's away, that's giving you most of the charge back. The aftermarket ones you buy will do a little more, and they'll do 16 kilometres charged an hour. Still useful if that's what you're putting in at home. 10 hours, 160 kilometres charged. If you're looking at a 15 amp power point, caravan parks, I often say caravan parks and EVs are marriage made in heaven. Because if you pull up at a cabin or a caravan site and you plug into a power point, 15 amps, you'll get 24 kilometres charged an hour. 10 hours, that's 240 kilometres. 12 hours, that's nearly 300 kilometres recharged. If you're coming in with 30-40% of your range already left to be able to plug in, it'll be fully charged the next day. And when I was travelling early in the piece, when it was only a few DC chargers around Victoria, it was only about 3 when I first started driving EVs around Victoria, I found the caravan park was perfect for a full charge. At home, as I said, nearly 50 kilometres charged an hour, that will give you, if you happen to get down to 0 and want to go to 100, that would easily get you a full charge. And I never start recharging at 0, it's usually around 20-30%, and I generally take up to about 90. So that would give 5-6 hours of charging. If you happen to be winning the EV charging lottery now 3-phase, like the house I've just moved into, I can actually get 73 kilometres charging, say 75 is a round number, per hour. And that's 11 kilowatts, and most cars will charge at 11 kilowatts 3-phase. Now almost all the cars in the market do 3-phase charging at 11 kilowatts. There's the odd car in the market, It'll let you do double that, 22, and get nearly 150 kilometres charge an hour. My partner's Renault Zoe will do that. It will recharge, it's about a 43, 44 kilowatt hour battery. 2 and 3/4 hours it will get a full charge on 22 kilowatts. On the other side is what I've shown there, the DC fast chargers, and I've changed the metric a little bit for how many kilometres in what time, or 100 kilometres in what time. The older 50 kilowatt chargers would do 20 minutes for 100 k's. Nowadays it's down to about 6 minutes for 150 charges, and that's most of the cars on the market do at least that. And some of the cars, the more expensive ones, will do up to 2.6 minutes for 100 k's. Somewhere in between those two, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 as an example will do 250-ish kilowatt charging. That will give you a full charge, sorry, an 80% charge, I should say, from 0 to 80%, about 17 minutes, which is probably less time it takes to pull up at a roadhouse on the way to Sydney, go to the toilet, get a cup of coffee, have a bit of a break. It basically forces you to take the break you should be taking anyway. And that's, you can do that every 3-4 hours if you want to do. I stop generally every couple of hours because I need the toilet break. Rule of thumb, I was involved in writing a course for electricians on how to install car charging, and that basically was, if you need to do any one of those things more than twice a week, more than 4 hours at a time, go up a step in charging. So if power point didn't quite do your job, put in a 15 amp power point, problem solved. If you had a 15 amp power point and it was still 2 or 3 8-hour sessions, look at putting in the full charger. And there's an article on the driven there about those. How far can you go on a charge? Depends, or doesn't depend really. You can get X distance, but there were 3 systems of measuring that recharge. The NED system, which is still Australia until later this year, and the old European standard they dumped in 2017, I can't remember what it actually stands for, but not even darn close is a really good way of remembering it, because you'll never get an NEDC number. BYD electric cars, they still quote the NEDC number alongside the better ones. I would never get 557 k's out of my car, but I would comfortably get 480 to 500 around town. And that's the WLTP, the European number. It's basically designed around mostly sort of inner to middle suburban driving, a little bit of higher speed, longer distance stuff, whereas the US standard is more middle suburban to outer suburban and higher speeds, more focused on highway driving, so it gives you a lower number. If you're driving around town a lot, look for the WLTP number. Most manufacturers quote that here now. If you're looking for doing lots of interstate driving, country driving, look for the US EPA number. And all 3 numbers are quoted in the fact sheets that I'll refer you to later, where they're available. Some cars are not sold in America, and a lot of cars are no longer rated to NEDC. And those settings are basically the written version. If you ask for the copies of the slides, that's the memory lookup. And I also have edition 155 Renew magazine. All my website reproduces all Renew articles. Doesn't EV go into distance? Well, that's me on the way to Perth about 3 years ago. Back then there weren't any DC chargers across the Nullarbor, so that was the traditional EV shop, take it to Butcher a pub. Being out back pub, you could park on the footpath, because you need to use their 3-phase outlet. So I use that 3-phase charger. These days, if you're looking for a charger, go to plugshare.com, and I've just filtered for 2, which is DC chargers and those wall-mounted chargers. The DC are orange, wall-mounted are green. Oops, back up a little. Go to that website. You can hone in on your own particular area, and you can then click on each one of those. Interesting part is, if it's got an orange with a spanner, both the spanner says it's being built, soon to be commissioned. If it's grey, it means it's broken down. If it's in its normal colours, you would then just click on it, click on any one of those dots, and it'll pull up the details. There is still not very good signage for finding EV chargers, so it's a bit like playing Where's Wally sometimes. Yes. So as a consequence, PlugShare is really good for that, because I'll actually have a series of photos of the charger going. I've had one particular one that was in Torquay or somewhere. I could not find the charger, so I looked at the PlugShare photos and went, and that's where it is. It's a great long street car park with about 6 streets, and picked the wrong street for the address. And I found it by the PlugShare photos. For the future, well, most home charging, most charging happens at home, so 70 to 90% of charging is done at your place of residence. After that would be, I don't get too close to the other microphone. The other would be workplace or shopping centres, that type of thing. Then there are some DC charges around for local regional areas. So that's in Fox Hill Central, the main car park. There are some smaller DC charges. Then you have what was the closed network of the Tesla chargers. They use the same plug as everybody else, and they're now opening up to everybody. So they charge a little bit of a premium, but for a few times, maybe 5% or less of charging when you use a DC charger. I don't mind paying a few cents extra if you have to be in a convenient spot. But as I said, they're opening up now. They were closed. NRMA had its own network. It's now been rolled into what's called the ChargeFox network, which is basically a network being set up over the years. And that's the ChargeFox network there. That's Bunawalk North, just south of the border. That was commonly my first stop on the way to Sydney. I stopped at Bunawalk North. Finding charging stations, as I said, pledge share. If you're in a different area and you try and find one, it's still not quite as common as a petrol station, but they don't need to be. As I said, 90% plus of charging events happen outside petrol stations now. 90% plus of petrol stations better get nervous. The business model is disappearing, especially local suburban ones. All the roadhouse ones will love it because people might stay in just a couple of minutes now. Once you've found the charger, then you go to the particular provider app. And there's various ones. There's a ChargeFox. EV is another one. I really love the EV network because once you've used their chargers a couple of times, it will know what your car is. So you use the phone app, you're going to say, that one is my car. So every time I pull up to an EV charger now, I just drive up, plug it in. I don't go up and up. I don't have to swipe a card, a credit card or a swipe card. It purely plugs in, recognises my car, charges it to the 17 I want I told it to, and it just automatically fills my credit card. BP have their own charge network, as does Ampol, AmpCharge. And those networks, at the moment, all have their individual apps and swipe cards, credit cards, there's all sorts of ways. In England, they've actually put out legislation where they say you must have credit card available. So you just don't need an app, you can just credit card it. Or if it is an app, the app must work across platforms, or swipe cards must work across platforms. And I'll let you into a secret. A swipe card, if you get one from one supplier, the swipe card, if you just register it with any other one, it will work as well. You just put the number in. So you can use a BP Pulse swipe card on an AmpCharge or a ChargeFox. You don't need separate cards for them. Promoting EV uptake, I often say, is about carrots, sticks, and policy. And around the world, well, that's the big stick is putting the ban on. As I said, I'll go back momentarily. Norway is at 2025 and it's at 98% electric car, plug-in electric car sales, almost all of which are now battery. Europe is at 2035. Some of the manufacturers, for some political reasons, have pushed back on America. What have the manufacturers going, oh, we'd like to keep building internal combustion engine cars a little bit longer, but that the EU is sort of still holding firm on 2025, although a couple of the countries may have moved their dates. However, the manufacturers have seen the writing on the wall, and they're pretty much been setting dates. Jaguar are still sticking to this year. They will no longer, into this year, they will no longer build petrol-based vehicles. They will all be electric. Volvo said 2026 will be electric in Australia. They'll walk that back a little bit and will say, well, we're still building them overseas. If you really want one, we'll see you, but we're not going to push them. Volvo has said 2030 for their all-electric, although they're walking that one back a little bit. Renault has said that they will be electric only in Europe, and a number of manufacturers have said that with that European mandate by 2035. I'm guessing they might push that back to 2035-ish, given the date that Europe has set. If you're looking at what's coming in the next 6 to 12 months, or what's already here, the Volvo ES90 has just arrived. Skoda Elrock has just arrived. That's got quite like the Skoda Elrock. I'm looking forward to the test drive of that one. And we already have a first two-door convertible, the MG Silestone. So the Nissan Ariya has finally arrived. After 3 years of promising it, the VW Combi has been reborn as an electric vehicle. And there's a number of others there. And believe it or not, new 10 vans are on the way. There is a full electric LDV e-Terron 9. It is due any time, has been due for the last month or two. It will be coming fairly soon. This one, looking like coming in the next few months. They're just setting up a dealership network at the moment. Rivian, who promised to bring their very impressive electric dual cab ute originally a couple of years ago, we'll probably see, it's a very big one, so I'm guessing now that they're bringing out two slightly smaller versions. We may see the R2, sort of a smaller but very smaller version, in about 2 years' time. Renault Kangoo, that's just the new version has just arrived. A number of larger vehicles, there's actually quite a number of anything up to 40-tonne electric trucks now available from Gaton, Mercedes, which had in Scandinavia earlier. 4D Transit, they've announced pricing and you can pre-order one, but that will be arriving very soon. That is a really impressive electric car, the 4D Transit, the full-size one. Deepal EO7 is pretty much a ute, an SUV, a two-seater or four-seater ute because the back seat folds down and a sliding glass roof. Very hard to classify it as a work car or SUV, I don't know which. And yes, the Ford F-150 Lightning has been electrified for several years, and they're doing right-hand drive conversions because they don't build the right-hand drive version at the moment, but they're actually doing conversions here in Australia. Affordability, that's the last couple of years where they started off around $180-ish per kilowatt hour. As I said, back in 2012, 2011, they were at $1,220 US per kilowatt hour, and they're now, the likely cost parity price, I say, is $100, and we're hitting it this year. And the first EVs, under $29,990 sale price, will probably arrive before the end of this year. Running an EV, you're looking at, and these are just some numbers, I've compared literally the electric battery, the electric Gaton with the full petrol one, and I've just used the same comparison. I'm going to use the WTP numbers for it, and that's the sort of savings you're going to get, roughly $1,000 per 10,000 kilometres. Service savings similar, because it's a 2-year cycle on the EV rather than a 1-year cycle. So $1,100 based on the $2 petrol price. I mean, as you bounce up and down a lot, mate, it was $2.10 yesterday, or $1.66. Nest busting, I quite like to bring this up because there's a whole lot of effectively lies from the game at the moment. Although an interesting one is a number of people fairly ask, should all petrol stations be replaced by EVs? As I mentioned earlier, 95% of the time we're using a downtime, so the location of petrol station is useless for EV charging because you're using a petrol destination. So petrol stations are disappearing and destination charging is appearing, most of which of that will be your home. EV co-fires catch a lot. EVs catch fire a lot. That's a really big one, and they keep saying, oh, they're terrible things. Well, the facts are, this is by one of the big insurance companies in America. They said 100,000 hybrid vehicles, 3,500 will catch fire. That's their sort of stats of what they're paying out on. Petrol vehicles, 1,500-ish, 25 electric. So the key take-home point there is if someone car catches fire, don't buy a hybrid. And after 13, 14 years of the Nissan Leaf, they haven't had one catch fire yet. And that's over 800,000 of them sold now. Another one is, oh, they're really, really much heavier than a petrol car. Well, that's not true. Hyundai Kona, about 11 to 17%, and that's a petrol platform converted to electric. These days, cars are coming out with full electric design, so they're making them lighter. So you're looking between 10 and 15%, and they're getting lighter all the time as the battery technology improves. So they're not hugely heavier, as the key point of the program. Fuel cell EV, oh, we've got to wait till fuel cells replace it. We'll get all the fuel at the petrol stations and get hydrogen instead. Not true. If you start off with 100 kilowatt hours of renewable energy, you'll get 69 kilowatt hours or 69% movement of the car. So that energy, pretty good for roads that can't go to power lines running the car. When it comes to hydrogen, if you can create it using green energy, using water as your source, not coal-fired power and coal as a source, which is pretty much what's happening at the moment. If you're using water, green energy, and just compress it a bit and pump it from the hydrolyzer across the wall to a refueling point right next to it, 23%. If, however, you compress it to the point of liquefied into a tanker and take it remotely, 19%. And that's not just By the way, if you have to keep it cold whilst waiting in that tank sometime further on. And there's various technological problems with hydrogen that as it warms up in the car, you can't refuel it until it's almost empty because the pressure slightly increases. So you can't actually refuel the hydrogen car until it's almost empty anyway, because the technology's not quite there. Another one from the Craig Kellys of this world said, oh, unless you're driving an EV in Tasmania and it is running on electricity there, they're pointless in Australia because you put out more emissions. Not true. This is using the standard methodology all around the world. Corolla on the right there, 1.5 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per 10,000 k's versus, even in Victoria with our brown coal, 1.41 tonnes per. This running on grid power, by the way, not your own solar or if you subscribe to grid energy. Tassie, where it's all pretty much hydro, less than a quarter of a tonne with those sort of numbers. And that's using the government's own data, the National Greenhouse Accounting Factors. We often say, oh, it's a lifespan of the car. The battery takes so much energy. Not true. This is sort of numbers, and I'll speed up a little bit here, and I'll come to the next little bit. In the US, they say running on normal grid power, it'll be 6 to 16 months to repay that carbon debt, so to speak, for building the car, the electric car with a battery. In Europe, it's around 2 years because they do fewer Ks per year. Various manufacturers are saying we're going to use green energy from the start, so our cars will have no carbon debt from the day they leave the factory gate. So Volvo, Polestar, and a number of others are working towards that, and some of them reached it. Some people say, oh, all EVs will just bring down the grid. Not true. If it's a managed charging, if everyone went to an EV overnight, so every car was replaced with an EV overnight, so we woke up morning an EV in our driveway, so long as the charging is managed, which is don't charge between about 2 in the afternoon and 6 on 8 on a hot summer's day, just control it, it will be fine already. And we had about perhaps 10% more load if all the world went to EVs. So it's manageable in the time frame of the changeover.